I stood there, champagne in hand, pretending to laugh with the rest of them as Richard told the room how I once nearly deleted our entire system because I couldn't tell AM from PM. Everyone laughed, except me, because I knew something they didn't. By that moment, every server his legacy depended on was already under my control. I'd spent months preparing for this, the betrayal, the lies, and now the stage was his, just long enough for him to dance in the spotlight before the lights went out. They thought it was his retirement party, but it was my opening act. They used to call me the ghost in the code. I wasn't the loudest or the most visible, but if something worked smoothly, if the system held firm, it was probably my fingerprints hidden beneath it all. For over a decade, I'd lived and breathed code, turning Richard's napkin ideas into billion-dollar algorithms. He used to pat my back and call me his secret weapon. Back then, I believed he meant it. The nights bled into each other. Most days, I wouldn't even notice the sky changing. I'd arrive before sunrise, leave after midnight, always the last glowing screen in the office. The janitor knew my coffee order. My daughter, not so much. I had become the kind of man who set a silent alarm on his phone, not to wake up, but to remind himself to go home, just to see her asleep, just to feel like I existed in her world, even if she didn't see me. I remember one night, I stood outside her room, watched the soft rise and fall of her chest, and whispered, "One more quarter, baby, then I'll be there." Richard knew all of this. He saw the sacrifice. He even joked once that I shouldn't voice my family for lost hours. Back then, I laughed. Now, I hear it differently. The first crack came quietly. A calendar notification. System Strategy Roundtable, 10 a.m. The kind of meeting I used to lead. But my name wasn't on the list. Not invited. Not even informed. I tried brushing it off. Maybe a mistake. Maybe a smaller team. Still, it lingered. Like a low hum behind the walls. Something wrong, but not loud enough yet. A few days later, it wasn't just a hum. Jake, the guy I trained, presented our newest AI model to the board. Not just the concepts, but the architecture, the interface, even the fail-safes. Word for word, line by line, it was mine. I watched him from the back of the room. He didn't flinch. He didn't even look my way. After the applause, I approached Richard. "You saw that, right?" I asked, heart thudding. "That's my framework." He raised an eyebrow, took a slow sip of his espresso. "Jake told me you were collaborating. You should have secured your files better, Ethan. It's a competitive environment." My throat went dry. "You think I handed him my year's work as a gift?" Richard smiled. The same smile he used when defusing angry investors. "You're too good to waste time on credit. Let Jake shine a little." That night, I stared at my monitor long after the screensaver kicked in. For the first time in years, I didn't code. I just sat there, breathing in the flicker of betrayal. It wasn't just Jake. A few days later, a message leaked from the executive Slack. I wasn't supposed to see it. No one was. A careless screenshot, passed from one cubicle to another. Richard, replying to the CEO, "Ethan's good, but not scalable. He's no longer a growth asset. No longer an asset, not even a person. Just a tool, now outdated." I didn't scream, didn't storm out. I went home. My mother answered my call after the first ring. "You sound tired," she said. "I think I'm being pushed out," I replied. She was quiet for a moment, then said, "You know, your father once designed the power grid for half the state. His boss got promoted. He didn't even get a raise. What did he do? He stayed until his spirit didn't. Something in me cracked at that. I didn't want to rot quietly like my father, but I didn't know what to do either. Not yet. That's when I got the email. No subject line, no sender name, just a single line of text. Want to know who really betrayed you? Parking garage, B3, 10 p.m. Come alone. I stared at it for a long time. Part of me thought it was a prank. Another part felt like the walls were finally whispering back. And somewhere deep inside, beneath the fatigue and the humiliation, a spark flickered. Maybe, just maybe, this story wasn't over yet. The air in the parking garage smelled of oil, dust, and secrecy. B3 was nearly deserted at that hour, except for a man leaning against a dull silver sedan, hood pulled low, hands in his coat pockets. I approached cautiously, footsteps echoing louder than my breath. "You came," he said without looking at me. "Depends," I replied. "Are you the one who emailed me?" He turned. His face was familiar, older than I remembered, creased, tired. Marcus. We'd worked together for a brief year before he disappeared without warning. No goodbyes, no LinkedIn updates, just gone. "I used to be where you are now," he said, believing in Richard, thinking loyalty was currency. "What happened?" "I showed him something brilliant," Marcus said. "He showed me the door." He opened a folder and handed me a stack of documents. Internal memos, dated emails, project logs. One name repeated itself, Richard, and a pattern emerged. Young engineers whose ideas got absorbed into the company machine, while Richard walked away with the accolades. "He's been doing this for years," Marcus continued. "Find someone with genius, isolate them, take credit, then erase them." My hands trembled as I scanned the metadata of my own AI framework. Updated last week. Author, Richard Coleman. Co-author, Jacob D. Young. My name was gone. Back at my apartment, I sat in the dark, the glow of my screen casting shadows on the walls. I pulled up the contract I'd signed years ago, back when I was just a hungry coder, eager to prove myself. There it was, hidden in the fine print. Clause 14.4. All intellectual property produced during tenure, regardless of individual authorship, is assigned to the company. I remembered the day I signed it. Richard had handed me the paper himself. "Standard stuff," he'd said. "Everyone signs it. You want to focus on code, not contracts." I poured a drink, then another. For the first time in a long time, I didn't go to work the next morning. I didn't shower. I didn't speak. That night, I sat on the floor, whiskey bottle in hand, scrolling through old pictures. My daughter's second birthday, my wedding day, my first badge at the company. When the silence grew too loud, I called my mom again. "Ma," I said, voice cracking. She listened as I explained it all. The stolen work, the buried name, the clause I never questioned. "You always saw the best in people," she said gently, "even when they showed you otherwise. What do I do now?" There was a pause. Then, "Just don't do what your father did." He stayed quiet. It broke him. When I hung up, something shifted inside me. I wasn't ready to scream, but I wasn't going to whisper anymore either. I reopened my laptop and began crafting a replica of the stolen AI system. But this time, I embedded a trigger deep in the core. If the code detected manipulation beyond a threshold, it would initiate a silent cascade, corrupting data copies while preserving an encrypted original under my control. A safeguard. My insurance policy. I archived everything into cold storage, offline, air-gapped, hidden. Then I began monitoring the system logs again. That's when I noticed something odd. A batch of files, my files, had been transferred to a remote server at 3:17 a.m. the previous night. The server wasn't internal. It was hosted through a shell company. Its IP traced back to a corporate data farm in Singapore. Coincidentally, the headquarters of one of our top competitors. Richard wasn't just stealing ideas anymore. He was selling them. The next day, I received a message on Signal. Sender. Unknown. Text. They've cloned your laptop. Factory reset now. Grace. Grace. Richard's executive assistant. Smart, efficient, invisible in all the right ways. I'd barely exchanged words with her in all my years at the company. Why help me now? I didn't have time to question it. I destroyed my hard drive that night. Lost weeks of undocumented work. But I saved the one thing that mattered. The truth. After I finished reinstalling the OS, I sat in the dark again. This time, not because I was broken, but because I was becoming someone else. My wife came into the room, paused by the door. She didn't say anything. She just stood there, holding our daughter. Neither of them came closer. I didn't blame them. I had become a ghost even in my own home. The next morning, I arrived at work to the sound of applause echoing from the main auditorium. Richard had officially announced his retirement. In his speech, he introduced his final contribution to the company, an advanced AI system designed from the ground up that would revolutionize decision-making, and there it was, on the screen, behind him, my work, my architecture, my name nowhere in sight. But something was different this time. I didn't feel helpless. I felt ready. The room buzzed with self-congratulations and the clinking of wine glasses. Gold streamers lined the ceiling, and the company's logo rotated slowly on a giant LED screen like some omniscient eye. This was Richard's send-off. 3 decades of leadership, of innovation, of vision. They even got a jazz trio playing in the corner. It was the kind of party you throw for someone who built a legacy. And I was the legacy. Ethan. Richard's voice cut through the noise, as smooth and smug as ever. Come on up here for a second. I stood slowly. The applause was polite, but shallow. Half the people in the room didn't even know my name. The other half only remembered I used to fix their bugs. Let's give a hand to our very own code whisperer, Richard said as I joined him on stage. There was a time when Ethan practically lived here. We used to joke he didn't need a home, just a charging cable. Laughter. He put an arm around my shoulder, leaned in close like we were old pals. I'll never forget the day he crashed our entire internal system. PM. Who knew such a small detail could cost us 2 days of recovery? More laughter. A few camera flashes. My face must have looked frozen. What they didn't know, what Richard didn't know, was that earlier that morning, I had uploaded a silent patch into the system. Just a subtle overwrite. Clean, elegant, untraceable. It included a remote access failsafe. One click, and the entire infrastructure of his AI would begin to dissolve from the inside out. But I didn't click it. Not yet. I just smiled at Richard. A smile that said, "Enjoy this moment. It's your last." They called for a toast. Champagne flutes were raised. Richard turned to the crowd and delivered his final thank you speech, full of buzzwords and fake humility. I slipped away from the spotlight and headed toward the back, where the lights were dimmer and intentions less rehearsed. Grace was there, standing near the service hallway, eyes scanning the room like a chess master studying the board. She didn't say anything, just held out a small black USB drive and whispered, "There's more you need to see." I took it, nodded once, and disappeared into the crowd. At home, the lights were off. My daughter's school drawing still hung crookedly on the fridge, 3 stick figures holding hands beneath a lopsided sun. I stared at it for a long time before turning to the shelf where her photo stood in a small wooden frame. "Just this once," I murmured. Then I sat down, logged into the secure channel, and pressed execute. At first, nothing happened. That was the point. The system wouldn't crash. It would unravel. Quietly, methodically. The AI that Richard had paraded around as his final triumph would begin reverting itself to a backup version. One, I knew, had a dozen bugs and 2 major architectural flaws. One they wouldn't see coming until the reports started contradicting themselves. Within hours, the automated error logs would flood the executive dashboards. Within a day, the investors would panic. Within a week, the press would circle like vultures. But it started with silence. The next morning, the headlines hit like thunder after lightning. Breaking! AI system falters in major tech firm. Questions of authorship arise. The article featured side-by-side screenshots. Richard standing proudly beside a blueprint and another from 2 years ago. The structures were identical. Too identical. My phone lit up with calls I didn't answer. Emails, voicemails, Slack messages. Panic had begun. Richard held a press briefing that afternoon. I didn't watch it live, but someone sent me the link. I clicked play. He looked older, paler. There was sweat on his brow. "We're investigating a possible internal systems glitch," he said, voice tight. "We are confident in the integrity of our AI." Then came the twist he didn't expect. Mid-sentence, one of the reporters interrupted. "Sir, we've received internal audit logs indicating a change in code authorship metadata dated months ago. Can you comment on that?" Richard froze. Just for a second, but long enough. Later that evening, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. "This is Helena Miles," a firm voice said. "I'm the new interim CEO. We need to speak, off the record, tomorrow, in person." I looked back at my daughter's drawing, still hanging crooked on the fridge. Then at the USB Grace had given me, now plugged into my laptop, waiting. Tomorrow, the real story would begin. The meeting with Helena Miles took place in a quiet office on the 24th floor, far from the chaos that was erupting below. She was sharp, direct, and already 3 steps ahead of the PR disaster. "I want the truth," she said, skipping pleasantries. "Everything." I didn't speak at first. I simply opened my laptop, plugged in the USB Grace had given me, and walked her through the data. Version histories, time-stamped commits, original architecture files dated 2 years ago, all signed, all mine. Then I hit play on an audio file. Richard's voice filled the room, smooth but unmistakable. "If you keep pushing your name into this, you're going to make things complicated. Just let me handle the front-facing credit. You'll get your promotion when the time is right." Her face didn't move. She listened, then leaned back in her chair. "And you have more?" I nodded. "Grace has copies. She's willing to speak, if you release her from her NDA." 10 minutes later, Grace joined us via secure call. She looked exhausted, but steady. "He used me to monitor anyone he saw as a threat," she said. "He told me to flag Ethan's projects and feed them to Jake. When I pushed back, he threatened to blacklist me across the industry. The puzzle pieces were snapping into place, but it wasn't just about Richard stealing code. It was about a system built to protect him while burying others. Then came the unexpected twist. Jake reached out. We met in a nearby diner. He looked shaken, the cocky veneer gone. He told me if I didn't take credit, he'd have HR find a reason to let me go, Jake confessed. I was scared. I thought, if I played along, maybe I'd survive. He handed me a drive. It's everything I have. Email threads, file transfers, use it. I took it. Not for revenge, for closure. That night, I went home early for the first time in months. My daughter was coloring at the kitchen table. When she looked up and saw me, her eyes lit up. Daddy? I knelt beside her. She wrapped her arms around my neck. Her tiny voice muffled by my shoulder. You came back. I held her tightly, unsure if she meant home or herself. That moment was louder than any applause I'd ever received. The next day, a shareholder emergency meeting was held behind closed doors. The usual PowerPoints were gone. No coffee service. Just names, numbers, and betrayal. Richard didn't show. The room buzzed with speculation. Helena stood at the head of the table and laid it all out. The stolen IP, the manipulated promotions, the internal intimidation. She read Richard's own words aloud. When she finished, the silence was deafening. Contracts were pulled. Legal inquiries opened. But the worst hit came hours later, when our largest client publicly announced they were terminating their partnership. We value integrity, their statement read, and we no longer trust this organization's leadership. By sunset, the press was circling like wolves. Helena approached me after the fallout. We want you to come back. Lead a new internal review task force. I shook my head. I'm not here to fix what they let rot. But you know the system better than anyone. That's exactly why I won't let it pull me back in. Still, I offered to help, externally, a cleaner break. While reviewing the system logs, I stumbled upon something that made my skin crawl. The auxiliary AI module. One Richard had always claimed was non-critical, had run a backup sync to an encrypted repository the day before the meltdown. Hidden within its logs was a list of users with super admin privileges. 4 names. Richard was only one of them. The others were masked. Initials, placeholder accounts. But the patterns were clear. Richard hadn't acted alone. There was a second layer, a protective ring, a shadow network. He wasn't the mastermind. He was the face. By the time we traced the funds, it was too late. Richard had liquidated his stock options, emptied offshore accounts, and disappeared from every known address. Gone. That night, just as I was shutting down my laptop, a new message arrived. No sender, just a single line. You think it's over? My hand hovered above the keyboard. For the first time, I realized this wasn't about one man or even one company. It was about something much bigger, darker, and still watching. It was close to midnight when the doorbell rang. I paused mid-step, my daughter's soft breathing still echoing in my ears from the bedtime story we'd just finished. My wife looked at me from the kitchen, concerned. We weren't expecting anyone. When I opened the door, Richard stood there, his suit wrinkled, eyes bloodshot, the confident CEO long gone. He looked smaller somehow, not weak, just human. I don't have long, he said. I didn't invite him in. He didn't ask. We stood there in the threshold, as if crossing that line would mean something neither of us could undo. You think this was about me, he said. But I was just a spoke in the wheel. You've only cracked the surface. He pulled a thick envelope from inside his coat and held it out. I'm not here to apologize. I don't care if you hate me, but you're not ready for what's next. I hesitated, then took it. The envelope was unmarked, but inside were documents, spreadsheet printouts, diagrams, incident reports, a map of manipulation. Different companies, different names, all with the same pattern: stolen work, buried credit, sudden exits. One page stood out: a tech startup in Berlin. Their lead developer resigned after publicly accusing their CTO of plagiarism. 2 months later, the CTO launched a nearly identical product, and the developer was found dead. Suicide. You're not the first, Ethan, Richard said quietly, and you won't be the last. I looked at him, trying to read through the lines, trying to separate guilt from warning. But what struck me most wasn't fear. It was exhaustion. He looked like a man who'd finally realized the cost of the kingdom he helped build. Why are you telling me this? Because I thought I was in control once, he said. Then I found out who was really pulling the strings. And by then, it was too late. He turned and walked back into the darkness. No goodbye. I stood in the hallway, long after he was gone. The envelope trembled in my hand. Then, for the first time in this entire ordeal, I cried. Not from anger, not from grief, but from the weight of knowing this wasn't just my story anymore. The next morning, I called Grace, then Jake, then 2 more engineers from other companies, ones I had only heard about through whispers and online forums. People who had been buried, ignored, erased. By noon, we had the beginnings of something real. We called it ClearFrame, a nonprofit initiative for ethical AI auditing. Independent, distributed, untouchable. Our mission: verify integrity, expose systemic abuse, and protect creators from being devoured by the same system that demands their brilliance. We didn't need 100 people. We just needed the right ones. Within a month, we had a beta platform live, encrypted submissions, forensic code analysis, anonymous tip lines. And we weren't alone. Support came from places we didn't expect. One afternoon, during a boardroom pitch, a man in a gray 3-piece suit sat silently through our entire presentation. When it ended, he pushed a folder across the table. My daughter, he said, was an engineer. She took her life after her CTO claimed credit for her neural model. I opened the folder. It was a trust account. 8 figures. I can't bring her back, he said, but I can make sure no one else gets silenced like she did. We accepted. Not for the money, for the message. A week later, I was invited onto a morning news program. I sat under the bright lights, camera lenses trained on my face, as the host asked, "So, Ethan, what would you say this whole journey has taught you?" I thought about Richard, about the first night I held my daughter after pulling an all-nighter, about the lies, the silence. Technology isn't evil, I said. It's a tool. But the way we use it, the way we protect those who build it, that's where our humanity lies, and we've been failing. I didn't expect applause, but I got it. Later that night, as I sifted through the day's flood of emails and support requests, a new message popped up. No subject, no sender, just a file attachment. File name, unlocked up on SN. I scanned it twice. No malware, no traceable origin. Inside, a single string of code, complex, layered, recursive, a framework unlike anything I'd ever seen, and a note. This is your real beginning. welcome to the shadow. The months that followed were quieter, but only on the surface. Beneath the calm, Clear Frame grew faster than any of us expected. Within 6 months, our platform had verified over 100 claims of IP abuse, some minor, others massive. Every case revealed the same pattern: invisible theft, dressed as executive brilliance. We didn't just expose names, we changed them. Our work earned us press, certainly, but it also earned us something more powerful: credibility. I found myself invited to panels, webinars, even government briefings, not as a victim, but as a voice. People stopped asking if it was true. They started asking what to do next. And then came the award. It was at a technology summit in Geneva, a crystal globe etched with the words, "For integrity in innovation." I held it in my hands like a reminder, not of victory, but of how close I came to staying silent. I had once told myself it wasn't worth the fight, that the system was too big. Turns out, the system only stays big when we agree to shrink beneath it. When I got home from Switzerland, my daughter was waiting for me at the kitchen table. She held up a piece of paper, construction paper, paint, glitter stuck to the corners. "That's you," she said proudly. I looked down. There was a stick figure with glasses standing on a mountain holding a shield. Above it, in bright crayon letters, "My dad protects smart people." I didn't say anything, just pulled her into my arms and held her until her hair was tangled in my tie. One morning, an encrypted invitation arrived in my inbox. It was from a global ethics consortium, an organization I hadn't even known existed, known only among the top circles of tech governance. They wanted me on their advisory board, not just to speak, but to shape. It didn't feel like validation. It felt like responsibility. The night before my flight to London for the induction, I found myself thinking about Richard. I still didn't know where he'd gone. Maybe he was still running. Or maybe, in some quiet corner of the world, he'd found a way to begin again too. A different version of penance. Clear Frame was no longer just a watchdog. It had become a network, a decentralized movement. Engineers from across the world were joining in, submitting audits, proposing new protocols for transparency. I no longer needed to do it all. I wasn't the center. That was the point. I stepped onto the stage at the Global Digital Integrity Forum. The lights blinded for a moment. Then I saw them, rows upon rows of faces, some familiar, some not. Reporters, CEOs, students, victims. The moderator introduced me, but I wasn't listening. I scanned the crowd, heart oddly calm. And then I saw her. Front row, third seat from the left. A slim figure, all black, face obscured by a medical-grade mask and dark glasses. Still, watching. My breath caught. The same posture, the same presence, the same vibe as the night that message arrived. This is your real beginning. Whoever they were, whoever had sent that recursive code, was here. I stepped forward, cleared my throat. When I was a young engineer, I began, I thought the hardest part of tech was solving the problem. A few chuckles. But I've learned that the real challenge is ensuring the people who solve problems aren't silenced, that the truth doesn't get buried under press releases and polished suits, that we don't confuse recognition with justice. I told them about Clear Frame, about Marcus, about Grace, about Jake, about the father who turned his grief into purpose. I didn't tell them about the code. I kept that one for myself. After the standing ovation, I walked off stage to a sea of handshakes and congratulations. But my eyes kept searching for the mask in the crowd. She, or he, was gone. Later that night, in my hotel room, another message arrived. No subject, no sender, just a line of text. There are deeper levels. You've only touched the edge. And below that, a new file. File name, Genesis.lock. I stared at it for a long time, not with fear, but with understanding. Some revolutions begin with a shout. Others begin with a whisper.